The unsettling rain. They say the rain awakens things that should remain buried. The rain had been falling for hours, relentless and heavy, soaking the vast savannah beyond our home. The rhythmic sound of raindrops hitting the tin roof was hypnotic, yet unsettling. It wasn't the soothing kind of rain, it felt oppressive, like it was trying to bury us in its weight. The open plains that usually stretched endlessly into the horizon were now shrouded in mist, the downpour turning the once golden grasses into a muddy, dark expanse. My fiancée had spent the entire afternoon scrubbing the floors, her movements tense and deliberate. The relentless task wasn't just about cleanliness, it was about control, about keeping a fragile sense of normalcy in a world that often felt too wild, too untamed. As I watched her work, I felt a pang of helplessness. She worked so hard, yet the rain undid her efforts with cruel ease. She insisted on having the house spotless, no matter how difficult it was. I didn't argue with her about it. Living out here in the middle of nowhere, surrounded by the vast, untamed savannah, I understood her need for order. But as the rain pressed on, a strange unease began to creep in, as if the walls were no longer enough to hold back the darkness. By evening, the storm had finally started to let up, the relentless downpour softening into a gentle drizzle. Yet the air felt heavier, the silence between the raindrops unsettling. My father's old friend, Roger, was supposed to stop by. I didn't like Roger, there was something about him, the way he carried himself, that made my stomach churn. His cold, vacant eyes seemed to pierce through you, seeing things no one else could. When the knock finally came, it was sharp and sudden, cutting through the rhythmic patter of the rain. My fiancée glanced at me, wary. Her gaze lingered on the floors she'd worked so hard to clean. She didn't have to say it, I could feel her frustration, her quiet plea to keep this space, our sanctuary, undisturbed. I opened the door, and there he stood. Roger was drenched, rain dripping from his hair onto his jacket. His shoes were caked in thick mud that clung to him like a second skin. He didn't greet me, he just stepped inside, his movements slow and deliberate. "Roger, your shoes," I said sharply, my voice cutting through the tense air. He paused but didn't take them off. Instead, he walked further into the house, leaving dark, wet smudges in his wake. The sound of his muddy shoes squelching against the wooden floorboards made my stomach twist. "Take off your shoes," I repeated, louder this time, a note of anger slipping into my voice. Roger turned his head, just enough for me to catch a glimpse of his face. His expression was unnervingly calm, his lips curling into the faintest hint of a smirk. "It's just mud," he said, his voice low, almost emotionless. "You can clean it later." A chill ran down my spine. His words were harmless enough, but something in his tone made my chest tighten with unease. I glanced at my fiancée. Her eyes were wide, filled with a mix of frustration and fear. I could see the helplessness in her gaze, with the same helplessness I felt. Roger moved deeper into the house, his trail of footprints darker now, almost black. I followed him, my steps hesitant, my heart pounding louder with each passing second. He stopped at the window in the living room, staring out at the misty savannah. The rain had reduced to a faint drizzle, but the darkness outside seemed thicker than ever, like it was pressing against the glass. "It's quiet tonight," Roger murmured, his voice barely audible over the rain. "What do you mean?" I asked, my voice trembling despite my best efforts. Roger didn't respond. He just stood there, unmoving, his gaze fixed on the darkness outside. The air in the room grew heavier, colder. It felt as though the house itself was holding its breath. I looked down at the floor, and my stomach turned. The mud wasn't just mud. It moved, subtle but unmistakable, like something alive. I blinked, trying to convince myself it was a trick of the flickering light, but the dark smudges kept shifting, spreading. "Roger," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "What's going on?" He turned to me, his expression eerily calm. "It's not safe tonight," he said. A loud, heavy thud against the door made me jump, the sound reverberating through the house like a heartbeat. Another thud followed, louder this time. My fiancée clutched my arm, her fingers digging into my skin. "What is that?" she whispered, her voice trembling with fear. I moved toward the door, every step heavier than the last. My breath came in short, shallow gasps. But Roger's voice stopped me. "Don't open it," he said, his tone sharper now, filled with a quiet urgency. "You let them in." The thudding grew louder, more insistent, shaking the door in its frame. The air in the room was electric with dread, every shadow seeming to stretch and twist like something alive. "The rain brings them out," Roger said, his voice barely audible. "What does?" I demanded, but my voice cracked under the weight of my fear. Roger didn't answer. He just stared at the door, his face pale and expressionless. And then I heard it, a sound that froze my blood. A low, guttural growl, followed by the faintest scrape of claws against the wood. Whatever was outside wasn't human. And it wasn't going away.